Okay, so just to talk about like some of the things you talk about on tour, why Corona Queens? If someone's watching this right now during the quarantine, they can't make it out to the house, how would you explain what that neighborhood meant to Armstrong?
Well, the way I see it, uh, like Lewis really didn't grow up with much, and he had less than little. And so as a child, the people who woke up in the morning and who had a job, a steady job, in his thinking, these were the people who had made it. These were, like they had stability, they had a routine, they could take care of themselves, they could take care of their families. And so, for working class people, that's really, particularly people who are below working class, that's really a level of attainment. Um, when Lewis moved to Corona, Queens, he was pretty much on top of the world. Uh, he was working 300 or 400, you know, he was doing like one-nighters, and he's doing long tours of Europe. He was an international star. He had already been in film. Uh, but he had that working class mentality kind of embedded in his consciousness. So I always say like his peers were Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra, and Bing Crosby. But when he moved to Corona, his next door neighbor was a telephone operator. He felt like he made it because he's living with people who could take care of themselves, who took care of their families, who were regular people. And as a child, I think these are the people that he looked up to.
So as much fame and fortune as he had, he never wanted to leave it, right? That these were always his people, right up until the end.
I mean, he had plenty of opportunities. Uh, if he could have left, why wouldn't he have left? Like,
Right.
he was there. That was his home. There was no, there's no documentation of him even uh, looking for someplace else. I can't think of any time, I think, didn't he have a place in Studio City while he was working on a film?
There was a place in he had a place in Palm Springs for one summer in 1960 when Lucille was renovating the house. They stayed there for a
Yeah.
while. Um, there's these small places where they would stay, for extended stays. But otherwise, no, there's nothing, even remotely resembling another residence.
Yeah, that's what so, I mean, Palm Springs is pretty nice, man,
Yeah.
Why didn't he leave? And I think he was connected to that neighborhood. He saw children grow up. He saw, like he said, 3 generations come and go. He saw the neighborhood change ethnically. Uh, that didn't force him to leave. There was no Lewis flight because there's different kinds of people moving into the neighborhood. Uh, that was his home. And I think in many ways, he curated that block. He took care of families on that block, gave away money and cars. He supported businesses. And he didn't have to do that. He felt connected. It might be that's also a little bit of a Southern hospitality, uh, kind of like an ethic that they have more in the South than they do in Queens. So that might be kind of odd in that regard. So I think all of these things, like I said, they add up. For a musician to have a career for as long as he did, and successful career. I always say this, like a bricklayer, if a bricklayer had a successful career as long as Lewis did, he's doing something right. Like why change it? Like why didn't Lewis start wearing a dashiki in 68 or 69? Well, because you don't fix what isn't broken, you know? And if it's worked all this time and it's still successful, why change it? Uh, and I think his connection to that community really reflected the issues and the environment that helped create him in the first place. So there was no need for him to leave. A lot of jazz musicians lived in Queens, and a lot of them moved out once they made a little bit more money. And up until the passing of Jimmy Heath just recently, he was the last one to stick around for all these years. So
How did the neighborhood change during Lewis's lifetime, and how has it changed in the 50 years since he passed away?
well, when he first moved there, it was a very Catholic heavy neighborhood, uh, a lot of Irish and Italians, and some Germans interspersed around. Uh, the block that he lived on was fairly integrated. The next door neighbor, Selma Geraldo, they were the first African American family on that block. Uh, and when Lewis moved there, you know, Lucille was Catholic, so her church was right around the corner. Uh, but then it started to become African American over time, and then it became there was like a Latin influx. I think Puerto Ricans started moving in like in the late '60s, if I remember. He was around when Puerto Ricans started showing up. And today we have primarily a South American kind of Caribbean Latin mix. Not as many Dominicans as there used to be, I'm told, but there's a lot of like Central and South Americans. But even that's in flux because now we're starting to see Koreans. There's a Korean church right down the street, and Chinese. So you're starting to see like an Asian kind of influx. And that's the thing about Queens, particularly when you talk about working class. People move in so that they can move up. You know, Lewis moved in and then he stayed put, in his words.